on some big bucks today. I'll get on the track, big buck, and lay one down today. It's a big 10-4.
Welcome to another episode of the Adirondack Bucks and Beyond podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Stagger Gear. If you haven't yet, make sure you head on over to the Stagger Gear website where you'll find everything from their wool tracker jacket, their Apex Merino base layers, and even their 100% rag wool gloves and much more. Everything you need to keep you dry, warm, and comfortable for a long day's adventure in the woods. Be sure to enter our promo code ABB with any purchase made on the Stagger Gear website to get 10% off your order. That's promo code ABB for 10% off your order, all at www.staggergear.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the Adirondack Bucks and Beyond podcast. Today it is Adam, myself, Cori, our buddy Joel Aubrey, and our guest Paul Putera. Paul, why don't you kind of go ahead and just give us a little background of yourself, kind of where you grew up hunting, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I grew up I was born in New Jersey, and then I grew up going up in the Adirondacks all summer and during the hunting season with my father and my family and stuff for years. So I kind of got a lot of roots up there, learning how to hunt and stuff like that. And then I hunt a lot around here, of course.
Where is that?
Northern New Jersey, I live.
Okay.
Yep.
So, Paul, when you say Adirondacks, this is Joel talking. Have you hunted around like both the high peaks and the southern Adirondacks? Just for our listeners, guys, obviously a massive park, so there's different parts of the Adirondacks. You don't have to say exactly where, but just.
Yeah, no, I've hunted from the southern sections, and I've hunted all the way up on the northern parts of it too.
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay. Cori, what did you wanted to start in with the HUBS?
Yeah, so I mean, we were sitting here talking before we actually got on the phone with you about how you are big on keying in on HUBS. So when I first started finding some of your content, Paul, where you were talking with other guys, you and Shane Parker, I mean, you're guys that preach these thermal hubs, and Shane talks about east and west facing hubs, you talk about northern facing hubs. When you guys are talking about these thermal hubs, can you just, for our listeners, define what you're talking about?
Well, I'm looking for like you're gonna have like a series of drainages and stuff like that on a mountain, and dropping off of these drainages, you'll have things dropping into those, and you'll get like these landings, where all the dropping thermals all kind of merge and land into the same area. And that's what I'm really focusing on when I'm looking for a thermal hub. And that's typically where you're going to find a lot of like clusters of scrapes and stuff like that, or you're going to find like you'll find a bunch of like rubs and stuff down in that like landing area. And it's basically all the bucks higher up in elevation are bedding up higher, and they're dropping down into these certain points like that.
Yeah, in the evenings, correct, to catch the thermals as they're starting to drop. Yeah.
Yep. And then they'll go from the hubs back up to the bedding in the mornings too.
Yeah, you've mentioned before, I've heard you on other podcasts, and I've seen this as well, is that in the mornings they kind of stage their way up, correct? So they'll bed a little bit lower, and then especially in these high mounds, that's one thing we've appreciated about you is, a lot of guys, talk hill country. Jake Bush is always keying in on hubs and some of his podcasts and stuff. But
their stuff is little.
Yeah, their hills are little. My average hike, I mean, I get 2,000 foot of elevation a lot of days.
That's funny you say that, because that's what we were just talking about prior to this conversation. Here is the difference in elevation and what's applicable to each different type of elevation. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're hunting stuff between PA and New Jersey and, the Catskills and wherever else you hunt that are pretty high in elevation, correct?
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're not as high as the peaks up in the Adirondacks, but they're a lot higher than like hills and down in like the South, like
right.
Ohio and stuff like that. But it's all the same concept. It's just different levels of size, So like if you're in Ohio, your drainage systems and your hubs are going to be just the distance you could shoot across with a bow a lot of times, super tight. But it's the same concept. The deer are just not moving as far, And then like up where you guys are, you're talking. I mean, some of your drainages could be mile wide,
Yeah,
and they definitely are. A lot of our drainages are just completely vast. I mean, yeah, we do get a lot of drainages too in certain areas that are more narrow. But I also seem to notice that we have a lot of diversity in terrain in comparison to a lot of places where it tends to be monotonous. And like some of the stuff I think, and I won't mention any specifics, but some of the stuff I'd sent you earlier in the week, I think there's a lot more diversity as far as when it comes to choosing areas to hunt based off of, different directions the drainages are running and where they're intersecting, versus some of the stuff in other states, maybe even Ohio. Not that I have the experience there, but just from looking at maps.
Yeah. Well, the stuff I hunt around Jersey, Pennsylvania, that's very similar to what you were showing me on the maps.
Yes. So in the southern Adirondacks, kind of as what we would call southern or eastern Adirondacks, we've got probably most of our hikes start at anywhere from 400 feet to 800 or 900 feet and we end up 2,000 to 2,500. Once you get into the high peaks, that's where you get a lot of the spruce tops and just all green or even bald tops up high, it's just totally different, dynamic up there.
Yep. Yeah, I know. And then the mountains I like up there are the ones with all the pine on top. They're the ones I focus in on.
And what is it about those, Paul, that you key in on those for?
It's just, I think it's like a better cover for a mature buck. They like that darker woods.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's so true. And that is what we're finding year in and year out in all these places where we're encountering these big bucks is there always seems to be a correlation with the darker timber, the cooler timber, and they're very moist areas. It was something you and I talked about the other day, particularly with the diverse habitat portion of areas that aren't logged. You're talking about areas where there's a lot of deadfalls and there's some dead trees. Well, I tend to find those in the areas where there's a lot of hemlock, spruce, and pine and that sort of cover. Would you agree? Yeah,
I agree on that.
Is that what you're seeing in PA and New Jersey as well, or is that specific to the Adirondacks?
No, that's Jersey and PA as well. Yep.
Interesting. Very interesting. What about the Catskills?
The only difference I have is you guys don't get much for rhododendron up there.
No, we don't have the rhododendron.
But that I get a lot of rhododendron on like my northern slopes and northwestern sides and stuff. I get a lot of rhododendron growth.
We'll get a lot of the striped maple,
cluster beech,
jewel weed around the marsh. They're munching that like crazy right now.
And the security cover in those areas tends to be the cluster spruce and hemlock that are like Christmas tree size. And I mean, that is the security cover up around us, which I would say is comparable to the rhododendron that you're talking about.
Yep. Yeah. The bucks like that overhead cover.
Yeah.
If you find a bed, it's almost always under like a hemlock or something.
Yeah. A lot of times you can pick those out from imagery.
Yeah. Even if it's like more open hardwoods and stuff, you see a hemlock on a ridge, something that looks good, you got to go walk over and check it because you never know what's going to be underneath it.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to your roots a little bit. So you grew up hunting or spending time at least in the Adirondacks that was with your father, correct?
Yeah, my father was really big on hunting up there in the Adirondacks. I mean, he's been hunting up there since probably the 60s.
Oh, wow.
So he was hunting up there for years, and he shot a lot of big bucks up there. So I learned a lot from him because that's where he wanted to go when he wanted to go hunting. So I got a lot from him, and I'm following him around, scouting and all sorts of stuff.
Now, what kind of hunting were you doing? Is he tracking up there? Is he sitting, still hunting? What kind of hunting was he doing?
He did a whole mixture of it. He did everything. He could track deer, and he knew when to sit. If he found a place that he should be sitting instead of running around, he'll sit on it.
So whatever puts him in the
whatever he got to do.
Yeah, he had a lot of tools in the tool belt.
And what was he keying on?
He killed a lot of deer he killed them in the late season, and he's also killed a lot of deer early season in the Adirondacks, like opening week and all sorts of stuff.
Really? In that muzzleloader season or with a bow?
That was with the opening of the rifle.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. The muzzleloaders they had back then weren't good enough to always get you a deer.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah. That's totally understandable. Now, were you guys hunting, as individuals, or you and him, or were there a group of guys that were hunting an area? How did that work?
We usually had groups. It's maybe like 4 or 5 guys we would go with. And a lot of times we would go in more like remote tent camps and stuff like that.
That's
so
awesome.
we'd go in early in like October and bring all the tents back and do all that kind of stuff and kind of figure out where we're going to set up camp and then scout and
That's
work
awesome.
from there.
That's awesome.
Oh, we love that stuff. That is awesome, man. I love hearing stories about that, and maybe even a little bit later in this podcast we can get into some cool stories that you have from your childhood there. But I want to talk about, before I forget about it, the whole group hunting thing, because you and I were having a separate conversation the other day, and our group here that we're sitting with, and then some other buddies as well that are involved, we really want to key in on enhancing our ability as a group to find success. And what we see with other groups is that there's a lot of guys that have it figured out in one way, shape, or form. What have you seen as, from your experiences in the Adirondacks and in both PA, New Jersey, and lower New York, from hunting with a group? And not necessarily drives, but even just still hunting or tracking, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, we always just kind of we always kind of played off each other, like if you got one guy going up high, you're going to put a bunch of guys down off fingers and stuff and a possible like escape routes, coming off of that mountain, so that way if something did get knocked off the top, you get somebody gets a crack at it at the bottom, so you try to be strategic like that when you set up things. So you'd have one still hunter, and then you'd have a bunch of standers, just kind of watching certain pieces.
So it's kind of like a drive aspect almost in a way.
Yeah, it's a drive. It's just you can't drive, like it's too big and vast up there to just make like a line drive,
Right.
It's almost impossible. They're just you're gonna have deer getting out the sides and squirting between people, and so like you're better off almost just kind of surrounding a feature and doing like little small pushes. Like you notice on the certain knob or something, just surround it and then put one guy up there to try to jump him out of the bed or something.
So you're keying in on one specific area, and whether that may be from scouting or something you saw, and then you're saturating that area with a group of guys.
Yeah, exactly. Like we always remembered beds and stuff we found, and we knew where a lot of the big bucks were bedding up there. So if we find a big bed, we take a note of that, and then we just go up and try to kick them off the bed one day.
So it's really just as specific as finding something worthwhile to go back to, whether that be a bed or the sign, and king.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and you kind of learn it. Like you get time tracking in the snow and stuff, you learn how they're moving through an area, and you can just kind of build off of it and just keep working a certain area for several years, and you really get a grasp on what you got to do to kill one.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're finding too, like we've tried the whole, smaller groups hunting together or, individuals working a hillside just in a kind of general area. And we don't have the success doing those kind of things. We don't have the success using those tactics. So moving forward, like I think what you're saying, being more specific and keying in on areas that we know big bucks are hanging out in, as a group, my hope is that we're going to find more success doing just that.
Yeah, and that's like most of it. Like to be successful, I mean, you're scouting. If you're hunting one day, you should be scouting 3 or 4 days. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, more scouting than hunting is really necessary, especially if you want to shoot something big. I scout year round. I never stop. I'm always out doing something. Even if I'm not scouting for deer, I'm fishing or something and putting myself in places where I could possibly see deer and pick up sign,
Well, that kind of leads into what I want to talk about next. You, I think, have a very unique way of scouting. Not that it's necessarily something that other people don't do. It's just you're doing it with your bow most of the time. And what I'm referring to is this bare ground tracking that you do. And I know a lot of it is season specific. You're going into areas during the actual deer season, finding the track you want, following it back to wherever it may be. But you also use that tactic throughout the year.
Yeah.
And can you get a little bit more specific as to what you're looking for and how you're doing this bare ground tracking and getting into these areas and killing the bucks that you do?
Yeah, well, it all comes back to like it's just like something you're exercising it, like I'll even when I'm not hunting, if I get snow or something late season because when by the time we get snow around here, we don't have much for hunting opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
So, but I can still track deer around and learn, and you're learning from tracking on snow and stuff, and then you're also reflecting that onto the track when you're tracking without the snow, because the deer are doing the same kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like they're still they still have the same kind of travel. You just can't see the track.
And I think that's where like we actually, have kind of the upper hand in that situation where we are getting snow during the deer season. At some point or another, just about everywhere within the Adirondack Park is getting snow. So we are fortunate to learn in season exactly what a lot of these deer are doing.
Yep, and that's I always tell everybody that hunts around here. I'm like, man, you have to go up north and experience tracking deer in the snow and follow them around. When you follow a big buck around a couple times, you really things start to click. You're like, okay, because they're not the same animal as a younger deer,
No, absolutely not.
They do everything different. And
yeah, we do have the added challenge that a lot of, places the further north you get, the Adirondacks, a lot of times they'll yard up because the snow gets so deep that you can pretty much scratch off anything you find, at that point, other than the sheds that you might find in a yard that tell you that somewhere 30 miles from here was a big boy. But I think also, even in the southern Adirondacks, sometimes, this year I wasn't able to get out to a lot of my spots till May because there was 2.5, 3 feet of snow.
Much,
it was just so much snow.
Yeah, there's a window between, like the middle of deer season when the snow starts flying and then the tail end where
the blessing with the snow, though, the blessing of that is once it does melt, it's like a time capsule.
Yeah, everything's preserved. Yeah,
right.
Everything's there. So like as soon as you can start walking around, you could get out there and really, really dial in on stuff. And that's a lot of it. A lot of it, I'm just learning where to go and because when you're following a track without snow, you're really trusting your gut on a lot of things. And it's just years and years of scouting that tell you you're going to be in the right place for the next move you got to make,
Yeah, I was just going to add, Paul, so when we get on snow, we find a track and we start following that deer, and, it's kind of self-explanatory, the whole tracking thing on snow. But is there any way you could kind of break down, you find the track on bare ground, what are you doing? Are you following? Are you like trying to follow that track specifically, or are you headed to an area where you think that buck would probably be hanging out or traveling?
It's a combination of both,
Okay.
So like I'll pick up a big like track off the road or something. I'll be driving a road or something over here, and I'll pick a big track up in a crossing, and I'll be like, okay, this is a fairly fresh track, and then I'm going to look at the direction, and I'm going to be pulling up maps a lot of times and be like, what is this deer doing? Like, where's he headed? And like, okay, he's probably going to cut up this area here. This section here is going to be ledged out. So he's going to want to probably cut up through this gap in the bluffs or something, and then you're going to charge up there, and then you're going to work that again. You're looking for the most subtle little clues. It's really tough to do, but I mean, it's doable.
Right.
You're moving incredibly slow. You can't catch up to them, so they got to be bedded down.
And now, are you referencing these hubs that you talk about? Are you referencing those as well while you're trying to locate that deer, I suppose?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing a lot, because like you figure when you don't have snow too, it's like you're kind of like that pre-rut stage. They're making scrapes, but they're not really like seeking does earlier in the year. Because I kill a lot of my deer like end of October, like first week in November.
Gotcha.
Like
before everything turns up.
Yeah, so it's like they're getting antsy, but they're still living in their cores. You know what I mean? So they're still in their established territory. So it kind of narrows it down to where they're going to be when you're kind of working around trying to figure them out.
I think that's what all of us would like to dial in on, because we don't a lot of times get snow.
Yeah.
Early, mid-October, late October. We have that early October muzzleloader season, which is like the 14th to the 22nd ish, which is just and then you have the next week after that, is the opener of rifle. We love to be able to really dial into the core area of these giants.
And that's when I've been in the Adirondacks. I've gone up for that early muzzleloader many a times. And that is like, I feel like that's so much easier to get on big bucks in that period than it is when they're really starting to seek. Because then they're just running miles. You can't catch up to them half the time. But if they're like living in their hub and working scrapes and stuff within their hub, you have a lot better chance of getting close to one.
So you think in that period of time, they're more consistent as far as how you're able to find them?
Yeah, definitely. They're not like totally, because usually they're going to hit the does within their core area first before they start fanning out. Mm-hmm. So you if you know where all the doe groups are and stuff in those little areas, you really got something you can work on.
And that makes a lot of sense, at least with my trail cameras. And so Joel's sitting here, he runs a lot more cameras than us, so he can probably speak better on this topic. But at least from the cameras that I've ran up there, I generally don't see a lot of these bigger bucks really fanning out until at least the middle of the month, and a lot of the times the later and the tail end of November.
They daylight. There's kind of almost a line that I've seen, that farm country is hopping around here November, October 30th to November 14th, and then the higher peaks, those fawns, if they're those does, if they were bred during the first couple of weeks in November, you might have some more issues with fawns being dropped before the snow's melted. So those bucks are running the 15th to the 22nd is where it seems like it's just, crazy. Right. And then some of the biggest bruisers I got on camera last year, it was the 25th, 26th, 27th. Yeah, they were daylighting, which they may be trying to pick up the stragglers at that point. But
if in that time of year, you get like a cold snap that comes in or something. Yeah. Well, it's magic.
Yep, that's exactly what happened. So, one thing we were kind of chatting a little bit about before, and we've I was mowing the lawn maybe 3 months ago, and you were talking with Dan Infault and Josh, I forget his last name, Telker, is that how you say it? Or
Tolkar.
Yeah, you were on their podcast, and you were. I've used Cal Topo for years, but I had no idea about the sun exposure thing for keying in on those thermal hubs where they're dropping all the time. And anyways, I was listening to you talk, and I was like, because I didn't have the video going or whatever, and you started talking and pulling up screens, and I was just like, hold on. I stopped mowing, went in the house, fired up my computer, and started listening, watching the video, and I just couldn't believe it. How sweet that was. And I know I showed these guys, Cori and Bailey, what you guys are talking about, and Adam's seen it, and they've showed some guys.
It's been freaky ever since I've been exposed
and we've
to
been
it.
going back and looking at all mature buck encounters and, lining it up with, these especially the northern facing hubs, points, drainages, the dark areas, and how you can just find places where thermals are dropping 24/7. So I just wondered if maybe on here you could just share, what Cal Topo is, what you select, how and what you're looking for.
Yeah, well, Cal Topo is an advanced. That's free. You could put it right on your phone, and it's completely free. And it basically gives you all sorts of options for running for different things going through the whole thing.
And they have a website too. You can go to caltopo.com, that desktop,
Sorry, you cut out there for a second. You said it's an app, correct? Just so everyone listening can hear that.
Yeah, there's an app you could download on your phone for it. That's what I run it on.
Yeah.
Because I don't even own a computer. So...
it really has been freaky ever since, these guys kind of picked up on what you were talking about. And we've ran into a lot of people who either know of big bucks using an area or have killed big bucks in a certain area. And I've been asking everybody I run into, I'm like, just pull us up on a Cal Topo map and we'll see where this hub is compared to where you killed that buck or that buck is using that area. And man, it is freaky. I mean, everybody I've talked to, I know a guy who shot 170-incher thermal hub. Another guy who was chasing another giant 150-incher plus thermal hub. And it seems like it's just a pattern that keeps going on and on.
It's not even coincidental anymore to us.
It's wild.
Well, it's the most advantage a buck can have for bedding, He has multiple points and multiple wind directions that it all works for him, and it just... everything lines up perfect, and those big deer, they're like a bird dog, they run that wind, they want to, so they can be the most efficient in a place like that with their nose.
Right. Where there's multiple different wind currents at any given time of the day.
They can get all sorts of different thermals, and they could work at different elevations and follow the thermals up and down. They have complete control over it.
And that's such a game changer for us, not only with the bare ground stuff of putting us in the right areas, but when the snow does fly and we're out looking for a track, it really narrows down when you take, say a 20,000 acre piece of woods. Where am I going to look for that track when the snow hits down?
Exactly. And especially in the Adirondacks, because you don't have the luxury of having roads to ride or anything.
No, and we talked about that as well. Our roads are the hiking trails up here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's with our 2 feet when we're Fred Flintstone in that throw.
So basically on this app, what you were showing, Dan and Josh, I mean, you can just go and change the sun exposure throughout the day. I want 9:30. Okay, this is where this is where the sun's hitting. This is where it's shady all day long. And what we've seen is those areas that you just keep changing it throughout the day. Noon, 1, 2, 3. There's spots where it's blue the entire time, and it's like, holy smokes.
Yeah, you get that constant vacuum.
Yeah. Have you seen that those a lot of times the giants? The biggest bucks are using the ones that are directly below hiking trails to smell the action of people 24/7.
Yeah, they can watch it. They can watch them walking, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
Because sometimes the biggest bucks are not actually in the deepest areas.
Yeah.
Just because of that, they'll be closer up to where they can monitor human traffic.
Yep.
And so maybe I missed it. You said it earlier. You're finding that most of these mature bucks, because again, I think you said this multiple times on different podcasts, the mature bucks are the ones who truly use these thermal hubs, correct? That you've seen.
You'll have other deer in them, but the big bucks are going to prefer those areas because it just keeps them alive.
Right.
Well, they have a lot of advantage in there.
It's funny. Joel and I actually were up scouting on one of the mountains we hunt, and we had, Joel had pinned this thermal hub, and we had dropped down into it, and we get right down into the middle of it, and there's a big old scrape right down in the middle of it, and we're
like 5 feet from the pin.
Yeah, we're like,
we've never been there.
We're like, well, I don't think this is a coincidence. So we started walking out the ridge a little ways, and there was a little flat bench up above this scrape. And we're like, well, we'll J-hook up on this bench and just kind of see what's up there. Well, we J-hooked up on that bench, and I don't know, what was it, 150 yards from that scrape,
Not
looking
even
directly
100.
down at the scrape. On the edge of that thermal hub was a big old buck bed staring right down at the scrape. And I was like, this is making sense now.
And now if you find that during the season and you look up the hill, you're going to see his tail going.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty used to that.
We went too far. We see a lot of tails. Yeah,
and that's the hardest part when you get into those systems. You like, I try not, if I see a licking branch hanging or something, I freeze. Because I'm like expecting a buck to be looking at that scrape, because a lot of times they do.
Right.
And that's how I killed some of those bigger mountain bucks that I've killed because I saw that scrape and I stopped. Instead of getting busted, I stopped and I waited and I set up, and he dropped down around dark, and I took him out.
As the thermals are shifting, he's dropping down to smell what's below, and you got him. Yeah. So another thing I've seen, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, is you especially in these higher elevations, you've got these massive drainages, right? And sometimes there's like 3 of them, and they're kind of coming up together. I found about 3 or 4 years ago, I found a signpost rub funneling around a marsh at the top of one of these drainages that faced east. And so you get this drainage facing east, and there's this marsh at the top of the drainage, and it's maybe a mile to the bottom of this thing. But I made a huge mock scrape next to the signpost to try to increase activity, and I put a camera on it, and I got crazy amount of daylight buck activity in the mornings cruising that signpost on the side of the marsh at the top of the drainage. So you get a lot of compounding features. But anyways, I was thinking, man, after listening to a lot of what you've been saying too, is they're catching that the rising morning thermals.
Yep.
At the tops of the drainage. Have you seen that before? Like, a lot of cruising activity at the tops of these drainages in the mornings?
They'll use a rising thermal on those, or a wind direction.
Yep.
Depending on where they are.
Well, and it's set up well because the predominant wind around here is south-southwest. So I feel like, if they're traveling, they've got the east rising thermals in the morning, and they've got a south-southwest wind. They've got 360.
Yep. And I always found that the thermals are more critical for a mature deer than the wind direction itself.
Because they're consistent.
It's always consistent.
Yep.
The game of odds.
Yep. Yeah, they know if they go over there, they can use that thermal no matter what. And that wind might be swirled and blowing all over the place, but they got a thermal.
Oh yeah, that's one thing the wind always does in the mountains. We found it always swirls.
And that is the beautiful thing about all this stuff that you're talking about here, Paul, is specifically revolving around drainages and thermals. Is it narrows down so much of the land that we're exposed to. I mean, you have the PA wilds out there that you hunt. You have the places you hunt in New Jersey and the Catskills, but very similar. But the Adirondack Park is obviously an animal of its own in size, and just being able to take some of this information and just narrow it down and put us in the areas that we need to be is just, it's a game changer. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it so much easier to figure out where you're going to find something.
Yeah, and I have total faith in it too, but based off of what we've seen just in the last few years. I mean, with the new mapping systems and all the technology available to us at this point, we're fortunate enough to have built up quite an inventory of information over the last few years, and everything just makes sense. This is like the clicking point of all of it.
Yeah, I had another question for you, Paul. You've hunted Adirondacks where there's swamps and marshes, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I personally I haven't done a ton in some of the more marshy areas. I've kind of I don't know. I stay out of the wet, but I do wonder with the drainages that drain down into the marshes.
Yep.
Have you if you're looking at a big marsh? How would you use drainages coming into it to your advantage to be like, okay, that's where bucks are going to funnel to smell everything?
Well, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
But they're a lot of times, like if they're bedding in the swamps and marshes,
Yep.
they'll be bedding where the drainage is going into it.
Right.
And that's their suction right there, where they get all the vacuum from the swamps pulling all that thermal down through that drainage and concentrating in one spot.
Gotcha.
And then that's also where you're going to find the big signpost rubs and you're going to find the scrapes if there's scrapes. Your
creek crossings and.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Now that's that big buck I killed in Pennsylvania was working stuff like that.
So, I guess my question is: how are you hunting these thermal hubs? How are you going about hunting them? Like, are you accessing them at a certain time? Are you setting up at a certain part of these thermal hubs? Because you're mostly killing them with your bow, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 95% of the time.
And that's our advantage up here. We always got the pop guns.
We have the great equalizer.
We'd love to graduate to the big league someday.
We all want to kill one with our bows up in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, so
but we just don't have the experience at this point to be doing that consistently.
I guess my question is just how are you kind of going about hunting these?
That's what everybody says, but I think it's possible more than people believe up there. Because I walk into some spots up there and I'm like, man, I know if I set up here, I kill a buck.
Right.
You just get that feeling. You find one of those spots that are that good in the hub. You're like, man, I could kill one up here opening week with a bow if he's in here.
Right. Yeah, we've kind of had that feeling before too in a couple spots.
Yeah, we have walked into plenty of areas where we're like, we should just throw something at it. Everything lines up, but we haven't.
Yeah.
Maybe we will.
And that time of year, that buck is like so much less cagey and stuff. Like you can catch them completely off guard.
There's definitely guys that are out there bow hunting in the Adirondacks, but it really is the anomaly. There's not many guys that are doing it. So the pressure, and I assume that's what it's like where you hunt in PA, New Jersey. The pressure is just substantially less, especially come September 28th or whatever it is that our season opens right around then.
But out west they do it. They shoot big bucks in the mountains out west like that.
Yes, they do.
And it's almost like, it's because the tradition isn't there. It's almost like there's a huge tradition of gun hunting in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, there's not many Troy Pottingers in the Adirondacks.
Yeah. That's exactly who I was thinking.
That's a great example.
I listen to him a lot. I'm like, man, I bet he could do the same thing in the Adirondacks,
I bet
except he doesn't have mountain lions. He have rattlesnakes instead.
Yeah. So you've killed some dandies in the Catskills.
Yep.
Let's hear a story of your best buck you killed from the Catskills. I'm super curious. We've talked about hunting the Catskills quite a bit, so I would love to hear what you have to offer from that area.
Well, I got a little chunk of property up there that we have our old hunting camp at, and that's the area where I killed my biggest buck up there. I killed him not far from our hunting camp on the public in a swamp. But that deer, I killed that deer. I was I was young. I think I was senior in high school when I killed that buck.
Now, was the swamp at the base of a mountain or up high?
It was a high altitude kind of swamp higher up in the mountain. Our camp was like probably about half mile down the road from where the swamp was. And that we always had big buck sign in this one corner over there, and I'm like, I told my dad, I'm like, I'm gonna go fucking find that deer. I'm gonna kill him. He's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you know. I went out, you know, and I started on my scout looking for him, kind of following sign and stuff. And I figured out where he was coming out of that swamp. And the following day was the opening of rifle season up there. And I went over there and I figured out where that buck was bedded in that swamp. I set up right over it, and once the pressure kicked up, he got bumped right in, and he came right to me like noontime.
So you shot him with your rifle?
Yeah, that was. Well, actually, it was. Yeah, it was. I shot him with a slug gun, but same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I saw a picture of that buck, and for those listening, this thing's a giant. What did he weigh, Paul?
That deer was probably around 220 pounds.
Oof.
That was a big buck.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Dandy.
He scores about 144 inches.
Man, what a dandy. I mean, I don't care where you are in New York State. That's a giant for New York.
Yeah, big 6.5-year-old buck.
That's awesome.
That seems to be pretty consistent, though, with a lot of the bucks you're killing. They're all around that 200-pound mark, correct?
Yes. Well, it's a lot easier to see a big track on a heavy deer in bare ground. You know.
So you're using those bare ground tactics, taking the track, and then the outcome is that you're finding, these 200-pound deer in areas where really 200-pound deer are not common whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it just comes around to the fact that they're 200 pounds, so I can see a track on the ground.
Yeah.
A lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a lot more noticeable.
Yeah, is there something like specifically that when you see a track, you say, okay, this is the one? Like, is it just the sheer size of it? Is there something that you use as like a measurement almost, or what is it?
Yeah, I'm always looking for 4-finger tracks, no matter where I go.
Yeah, that's basically kind of same with snow, with what people say is a 4-finger. Yeah,
4-finger. I like to, I always try to find places where I can pick them up. I'll walk like creek banks and stuff where I get mud. I try to stay in areas where I can pick up a track and I identify it and get a good clean print. So I'm always walking in places where I can do that. To start one off,
It's so unique that you do that too, because there's not a lot of guys who can do that and say that they do that. But how often are you finding that you can actually follow this buck through the leaves and dirt after you pick it up in that creek or whatever?
You need to get some kind of conditions. Like I like to strike out real early in the morning when you get a lot of moisture on the ground still. And stuff, or you gotta get some precipitation, some rain or something to help, help you get a sharper print. If it's like dry popcorn, it gets difficult and it doesn't work so much.
And now, are you sneaking up on these bucks while they're in their bed, or what's the deal? Are you usually catching them getting out of their bed? How's that usually go?
What's going on? Because what I do is I'm following this sign and tracking them back like that, and I have a tree saddle on my back usually.
Okay.
Or like a small stand or something. So I have the option to set up with a stand. But
gotcha.
But a lot of times what keeps happening to me is I'm slinking through the woods and I start picking up where I think this buck is bedding, and I'm moving, so I'm creeping, trying to get really close to the bed. And I wind up crossing paths with them,
Right.
And that's happened like 4 or 5 times now. So it wasn't just like a fluke.
Well, I think it's probably also important to mention, like, maybe have you talk a little bit about, like, what is your pace as you're doing this? Because I know me, I'm always blowing through the woods. I'm always going 100 miles an hour. So are you what kind of pace are you holding? Are you going fast until you think you're in the area? Are you automatically going slow right after you find that track, or how are you going about it?
From all my years of scouting and identifying bedding areas and stuff, I really can look at the woods and read it and tell when I'm getting into a situation where they're going to be bedding around, And once I feel like I'm getting close to a bedding area, I put it on really slow.
Right.
I'm moving like I'll take a step every 10 minutes slow.
So it's basically based off experience and time being in the woods that when you need to start slowing down.
Yeah, like you'll see like browsing. If you see a lot of browsing in an area, like that there's probably bedding nearby, because that's usually when there's a concentration of browsing. You're getting close to bedding areas.
Yeah,
you look at use the terrain, stuff like that.
It's funny because I know you've done it and been successful in it, so it kind of makes it sound like, it sounds like it's easy for you when you talk about it, but I just know from tracking on snow, it's basically the same thing, and we have just as hard time doing it on snow, so I can't even imagine doing it on bare ground.
Yeah, well, if you saw the amount of bucks I've jumped over the years compared to the ones I've shot, like, I wouldn't look that good,
Yeah, but the fact that you're even getting close enough to catch them coming out of their bed says something in and of itself. But
even then, like, how many times do you get that situation with a gun and then you wind up shooting at 25, 30 yards anyway?
Right.
You just got a bow. You just got to be confident that you can shoot them with it.
No, that's very impressive, especially on bare ground. That death creep that you're talking about, and having the discipline and the patience to be one step every 10 minutes, that's a skill in and of itself. It really is. And like my brother was just saying, we struggle with that.
I hunt all day when I go out, so I'm not going anywhere. I got no race to get somewhere.
Right.
I don't have a specific destination that I want to get to. I'm just, if I feel like I gotta go slow, I slow it down. It's like it's tracking and still hunting at the same time. You can't catch up to deer,
right?
Unless they turn around and come back at you, then you got them. But.
So I know you had mentioned it kind of changes the game a little bit when the leaves are crunchy and stuff. Are you still doing that when the leaves are crunchy? Are you changing your tactics a little bit when that happens?
I'm a lot of times like I'm going to be going off of like what I've been finding over the days I've been hunting. So like if it's a bad day for picking up tracks or something, I'm going to be more focused on the stuff that I found while I was moving. Because like as you're going, you should be scouting.
Right.
And like I'll be picking like, oh, I could set up in this tree over here. This is a good spot to set up. If I came in here in the morning, I could probably get a crack at a deer in the morning over here. The way this sets up, and you just kind of build up this inventory of different things you can do throughout the week. And that's basically how I'm doing it. So like there's no like rhyme or time frame when I kill a deer. It just happens, throughout the season. Like I'm not like a guy that's like, oh, I'm only killing deer in the afternoon coming off of beds or something. I kill deer at 7 o'clock in the morning. I kill deer at noontime. I've killed deer at dark. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just such a unique way of going about it. And it's funny you say, you hunt all day, because usually when you hear guys talking, they aren't hunting all day until that rut kicks on. So you're out there doing the early season. It's really, really cool and unique.
I'm even doing it in September. Like we got the September opener around here. I'm out all day. It's 95 degrees out.
Right.
I'm still out. I might be changing. I might be glassing over bedding areas, watching ridges. I'm doing something. I'm staying in the woods because, the deer get up and move. They don't always just stay in one spot. They'll get up and shift around in their beds and stuff. And that's a big thing. People don't realize how much a deer actually does move inside its core area in daylight. They're not moving far, but they're getting up and moving. And if you're in that general area tight, you might get an opportunity.
we rely so much on the visual aspect of deer movement and hunting in general that I think that's such an overlooked piece, especially early season. The fact that, it's not just you that's out there saying, I mean, these scientific studies that are coming out year after year now are all saying the same thing, that deer are moving throughout the day in and day out. I mean, really, it reiterates the fact that we need to be out there at any given point in the season. If the season's open, why not spend the entire day out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Anytime you got time to go, you just go. And
Paul,
the more you hunt off times of the year, the better you get at it.
Absolutely.
You learn things.
Repetition.
So was it last year? I think I heard a story. Last year you were in Ohio and you actually managed to track a true giant back to his bedroom and then maybe even potentially got a crack at him. Am I remembering that right?
Well, I figured out where he was probably bedding, and Stu.
Oh, you still there, Paul?
And everybody.
Oh, hey, sorry, you broke up there for a second.
Yeah, well, I found that deer, and I was tracking him back through a big drainage system, and I am lecturing everybody how you got to stay in the woods and everything. And that was the one day I got back up and went out to my car to get something to eat.
That's how it happens.
And I came back into the woods there, and that buck was trailing a doe right through what I just scouted, falling up to that bed. All the sign was hot, and I turned around and I left it.
So you had found the sign prior to going back to your car is what you're saying?
Yeah, I found the sign from the road.
Okay, gotcha.
And I was following it back in, and I followed it back in like a mile. And here I am. I turned around because I'm like, man, I forgot to get lunch. I'm going to get something to eat, and I'm going to come right back in. And stupid me, if I had I just set up on it like I was intending to, I would have had the deer on the ground, but we met face to face, and you ain't getting a crack off with a bow
Right.
at a giant buck looking at you,
Oh, I didn't realize you were still on the ground. I thought you might have even been in a tree.
No, I wasn't even in a tree yet. No, I was on the ground. We were eyeballing each other.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one to swallow.
But that's I do it. The year before, I had the same situation, and I set up on it, and it was like a pouring rainstorm, and I tracked the deer back through this bottom, and I figured out all of a sudden I see where he hit a scrape, and I could see where he went up one of the hills. I could see where he was skidding up the hill to get up the hill. I'm like, that sucker's bedded right above me up here, and I set up on him in the pouring rain, and around 3:00, all of a sudden I look over my shoulder, and here he comes coming down. But I had a little mishap, and I missed him. But that was a real big buck. That was another one that was like 160s,
Oh, painful.
But
So this year, I mean, I know you hunt Ohio, obviously PA, New Jersey, but you said you're planning on making a trip to the Adirondacks. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's we're trying to, because we're going to be in Ohio in November, but I want to get up to the Adirondacks for the last week. That's what we're trying to do, me and my buddy. So my buddy likes hunting up there. He goes up every year, and he's always up there tracking and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are going to be timing it perfectly. I mean, that is when the snow is there. You're almost guaranteed to have snow somewhere that last week of the rifle season.
Yeah, that's really like the only gun hunting I really like doing anymore is if I can get up there and do it like that.
Right.
Does your buddy hunt up there year in and year out, or is he just every once in a while coming up north here?
He tries to get up there every year.
Yeah.
He tries to get up there when it's snowing every year, at least for a weekend or a couple days.
Well, I'd love to see, obviously how you guys do during the late season there, but moving forward, in years to come, I'd love to see you come up here with a bow and maybe turn up some stones and really open up some eyes to what the potential is here.
Yeah, I think it's totally doable. I got to get up. I think the best time for me to get one up there with a bow is going to be early.
Right.
We don't have, as you probably know, we don't have that early September season, but we have that late September. And honestly, it seems like a lot of the deer, even in the portions of the state outside of the Adirondack Park, they still sometimes tend to hold a pattern well enough to be able to implement some of the tactics that you have going.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think that's what's going to come down to. I'm going to have to find one in like a hub like that and kill one in that hub situation. Dropping down as soon as those scrapes start hitting in that hub is when you really got to be there.
I'm hoping this year moving forward too. Like there's some areas that I have in mind that I don't know as if the scrapes are opening up that early, but definitely into early muzzleloader we're seeing that sign pop up. I would love to try to implement some of this stuff you're talking about.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I've seen when I've been up there with the muzzleloader too, is that's right around the scrapes are starting. They're getting all fired up, but it's not like the does are ready yet, but you get a cold snap and they're all fired up.
And it seems like we're almost guaranteed that one good cold snap between like the 15th to 25th, somewhere in that time frame.
Yep.
If there's not one, maybe even two.
Yeah, it was the 20th this last year. It just blew up.
Oh, yeah.
Every camera was just on fire. Daylight monsters.
And those big bucks are stupid right then.
Oh, yeah.
That first one that makes them dumb. They'll be dumb for like
susceptible to the scrape.
You can get away with a lot that time of year. You could just accidentally make the wrong noise and he'll come down and investigate it.
Right.
Now, Paul, with you saying you're coming up here to track, how would you start your day and how would you roll through a day of hunting? Now, you're saying that you scout going in to different areas. That's not always the case up here, with you being out of state and stuff like that. How would you pick apart an area and, plan a day?
Well, I don't get up there and hunt enough, but I do get up there a lot in the summertime and I go hiking and I'm scouting up there when I'm up there, so I have a lot of areas that I know that are going to be good. And I have a lot of places that were always consistently good over the years with the family that I can use, so like we have our spots where we know we can get up there and get on deer.
Well, I guess we'll put you in this scenario. If you were to go to somewhere where you've never been before, how would you go about hunting a deer using the tactics that we've kind of talked about so far?
The first thing I'm going to do is start looking at maps.
Right, finding those hubs.
Finding those hubs, find those features where it's going to funnel deer down, so I can go in and start picking up sign. And then I could start working it out.
Right. Well, that brings up something I wanted to mention as well. And I think I heard you mention on another podcast about how you notice most of these bucks, which I think especially guys that track have noticed, they're J hooking into their bed 9 times out of 10. How are you overcoming that J hook, particularly when you're tracking on the snow? Because a lot of the times, on a personal level, I'm getting beat by that J hook. I'm falling right into the trap. I'm walking right down below them. And we know too that, based off how they're bedding in these hubs and over these scrapes, they're using visuals just as much as they are their nose.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, they're watching their backtrack a lot of times when they're starting that J hook, So like once you feel like you're into a spot where you think you're going to see them bed, instead of staying on the track, you might be better off getting off of it and creeping around and trying to get out of that track, because if you're standing where his tracks are, he's going to be looking at it.
I was kind of hoping you'd say that, because you hear both ends of the spectrum when it comes to tracking. You know, you have your guys that are hardcore about just staying right on the track. They're do or die by it. You know, whatever happens, happens. And then there's some other guys, you know, not many, but some that are, they'll say they'll swing on it. You know, they'll take the high side and, you know, hope to pick them up in the next drainage or on the next side of the mountain. But, you know,
we had the advantage over the old school thought process because we have phones with maps on them.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I was, you know, so excited to get you on the podcast here, is because you're taking, you know, traditional woodsman skills, you know, whether it be bare ground, with snow, whatever the case may be, these traditional woodman skills, and using the modern technology and really bringing to light, you know, ways that are truly effective to kill these deer regularly.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And you're combining those two, and it gets really lethal at that point.
It's,
you know?
Yeah. I mean, your track record shows, and I mean, while we're talking about this, for anybody that doesn't know Paul or hasn't seen his social media, you know, just give him a like and follow, and you'll see that this guy's a killer. You know, he's killed a lot of giant bucks in a lot of different parts of the country and areas that are very similar to what we're talking about here in the Adirondacks in the Northeast.
And that's why we were so drawn, you know, when we first heard about your stuff, Paul, and started listening to you, because we were like, oh my God, this guy's opening doors that we didn't even know we could open.
Yeah. I'm excited over this too, because a lot of the guys that are doing the bow hunting thing should really be getting more involved in the tracking aspect of it, because they mesh so well, and it becomes really lethal when you can know both. You know, because you can play off of each one to make yourself better. You know, you can use all these tactics with either one.
Now I've got a question for you, Paul. This is something I've heard. I listen to a lot of podcasts and driving around and stuff. And, you know, you listen to the tracker podcasts, and you'll get a lot of trackers that'll say here in the Northeast, you know, oh, I think you could find a buck's bed or even a bedding area. They just lay down wherever they want. And then you have guys like yourself like, oh no, there's definitely, you know, areas to focus on. But I wonder if, like, up in Maine, I hear that a lot. And Maine is one of those, you know, it's all flat. There's not, you know,
cut up with roads.
Yeah, it's cut up with roads. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. Like, I do think, yeah, sure, sometimes
I think there's some truth to that, because during the time when you're tracking deer, they're seeking does. So they're not in their normal course.
Yeah,
that's a great
point. But if you're hunting the tail end of that or the beginning of that, you're hunting bedded bucks in their bedding areas where they live 90% of the year.
That's really helpful.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
So situational to the timing of the season.
Yep, exactly. So like they'll be running mad and laying down wherever they can when they get tired, and feeding when they're hungry during the rut. But outside the rut, they're living. They got other things on their mind.
Yeah, they're just surviving. They're trying to survive.
Yeah,
and it's no mistake that they end up in a lot of these areas where we're finding, you know, later season, we're finding the sheds. Early season, we're finding the sign that says that they're spending a lot of time in there.
And that's why I focus around here. Like if I'm hunting Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, I'm hunting that earlier pattern when they're still in their core areas. And then once they're really seeking hard, I'm moving to states like Ohio, where there's a ton more deer and a lot more big ones running around, where it's more, you could find a good spot and set up, and you can get a random giant to come through, because you got to stack. It's all percentages. You know, if you're in a low percentage area, you can sit the whole rut in the Adirondacks and never see a deer.
Right. Unfortunately, that is the truth with our deer densities.
You know, but if you're hunting a deer when they're not moving and you're putting yourself real tight to where they live, you're going to have a higher percentage of seeing that deer at that time.
Oh, that's a great point. Great point.
The other question I had for you, I know you don't run a ton of trail cameras anymore, at least from what I've heard. Is that correct?
I run cameras for like September, hunting and stuff, I'll run them in the summer.
Yeah.
I'll use them on patterns like that. But other than that, I'm not really going crazy with them anymore.
So one of the things I tend to have pretty limited time to hunt. So I try to get as many eyes in the woods as I can, just monitoring annual, primary scrape activity. And a couple years ago, I killed a buck to the date, mature Adirondack buck hitting the same
Very good buck.
scrape.
Yeah. Every year he shows up.
On the 16th of November, he was coming through that area. Now, one year it was 3 a.m. in the morning, but I said, maybe this year it's colder this year. So I think it was 2020. 2020 or 2021, I guess it was. I sat there and at 6:45 or 7 o'clock a.m., I whacked him, following the same doe who had actually blown at me as the year before. So I just curious what your thoughts are on that. I know it can be a little dicey with food shifting and stuff, but in areas where there's not a lot of food, changing mass crops and everything, more consistent. Have you found that over your years that doe groups turn on at the same time?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's consistent. That's one thing I will not do is shoot does that I know what cycles they're on.
Yeah. Don't shoot mama. Yeah, whack the fawn.
All right. Well, do you guys have anything else? Any more questions that you had, or?
Man, I could probably just talk all
I know,
night
we
if
could-
get
we could
Corey
going.
wants some Ohio advice.
Yeah.
He's going to Ohio. and he
Well,
wants,
I can chat you up about that
Yeah,
through text,
yeah.
Paul. We don't have to do that here, but I appreciate you coming on. I want to speak on behalf of everybody here. I mean, I know you love talking hunting. We certainly do too, and this is just scratching the surface of probably what we could talk about.
Yeah, we are super eager to put some of this to the test this coming season, and we'll be listening to any other podcast you're on or any more information you're coming out with.
Yeah, and you got to get some more guys on like me that you can translate over and keep this going.
Yeah, definitely.
We love the modern aspect that you're bringing to the table here. I want to speak and say that, I'm not trying to discredit any of the guys that have been doing this for a lot longer than we have, because obviously there's plenty of people that have success. However, with that being said, you're coming at it with a fresh point of view that I think is beyond applicable for what we're doing here, in the mountains that we're hunting.
Yep. And I'm always building, I'm building off of that. I listen to podcasts as much as I talk on them,
Absolutely. I mean, that we, as much as we need to adapt, the deer are adapting just as much.
Yep. Yeah. You're just constantly evolving because, all these tactics too, you got to remember everything you talk about on these podcasts is becoming popular too.
Right.
Oh, it absolutely is.
And this,
so that's going to put pressure on some of these topics.
well, and this general topic that we're kind of been talking about, the whole HUBS, thermal HUBS thing is, it's been around. People have definitely talked about it, but I really think it's just starting to come to light a little bit, and more people are starting to grab onto it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Yep.
And you offer it in such a simplistic way too that, as much as, I look at what a lot of the old timers say, or a lot of the stories that you hear, oh, this is a really good area, blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, it's a good area. We know it's a good area, but you're answering the why to a lot of those questions.
Yep.
So needless to say, we appreciate it. This year moving forward, I can't wait for you to come up here to the Adirondacks and see what you turn up. I'm hoping that you find the success you're looking for, and we can get back together and talk about it.
Yeah, and when you come up, let us know. Maybe we'll be in the area or something. We'll be able to sit down and have some dinner or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Paul, we appreciate it, man. I'll stay in touch with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll just stay in touch, Paul.
Yep.
All right, guys. That will wrap it up. That was Paul Putera. Greatly appreciate him coming on and talking to us. As always, go give us a follow and like on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all under Adirondack Bucks and Beyond, and we will catch you next time.